Who here is familiar with mindfulness? Hands, show of hands. Really high if you're pretty familiar. Medium if you kind of just heard of it. Yeah. Does anybody here have a mindfulness practice? Regular mindfulness practice. Anybody? I do. All right, so we have one. Mindfulness is simply being aware. That's what mindfulness. Mindfulness is being aware of the present moment without judgment and without reaction. And so this is a core quality, a core feature of any effective, good, and helpful therapist, is that we are aware. And the whole kind of point of what we're studying here is to deepen levels of awareness, right? They talk about how as you go through your clinical training, your clinical development, the way you view the world, it changes. It shifts really substantially. We talked earlier in the class about splitting. This events where we want to see things as either good or bad. There are either good people in the world or there are bad people in this world, right? This very kind of black and white category. What that does is it helps you to navigate the world a little bit more easily, in a sense that it makes it a lot less complicated. But it brings a lot more difficulty in navigating the world because of black and white, good or bad categories. These aren't actually sufficient to enable us to meaningfully step into the ambiguities and the confusions and the difficulties of life. And as a therapist, if you're looking at people as either good or bad, if you're looking at everything that someone does as either good or bad, that's not going to help you to actually step into their subjective experience. It's a very objective perspective of evaluating and judging, but it doesn't actually help us to step into somebody's unique internal experience. And this is one of the core features of therapy, that we are trying to empower individuals to become more acquainted with their own interior experience, with their own stories. Because when we understand our own story, we understand the idiosyncrasies that are occurring. When we develop a sense of compassion for ourselves, we aren't so afraid to see the beam in our own eye, because we don't have to morally judge ourselves in this punitive way and punish ourselves endlessly. We can just see, oh yes, I have this huge beam in my eye. How understandable, considering I'm a human, and I'm finite, and I'm limited, and I was just thrown into this existence as a child of other limited, finite beings. We don't have to punish ourselves endlessly as bad people because of our failings. We can just rather observe them, and when we can observe them with compassion, that's actually when we begin to change. Carl Rogers says something along the lines of, the paradox of change is that it cannot happen until I accept myself completely as I am right now. And so mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, is the practice of, in a set of time, 10 minutes or so, we're sitting down and simply trying to cultivate an awareness that's just observing. We're not judging as good or bad. We're not saying I'm good or bad as a meditator, or I'm good at this, or I'm bad at this, or my discomfort in my lower back is bad and I need to escape it, or I need to try harder. Someone earlier in the class, in one of their presentations, talked about, in their philosophy class, somebody saying that we are human beings and not human doings. And especially in the West, we are obsessed with doing. We go. More growth, more health, more wellness, and these things are good. But if we can't step out of that and simply sit and be, then we're never able to be ourselves. We're never able to be in relationship. We aren't doing in relationship, we are being in relationship. And so mindfulness is the practice of cultivating that sense of being. There's a saying that I heard the other day that I just loved, and it really struck me. The saying is that growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of cancer. And I think that's a lot of times the growth mindset that we have, especially in the health and wellness field, right? There can kind of be this toxic growth mentality, especially in the kind of motivational kind of coaching attitude of you just got to want it more, you just got to push through more, you just got to try harder, you just got to figure it out more. but there's no end to it because there's always going to be more to do, and there's never going to be an end to the to-do list. So there's a certain sense in which we need to be able to just sit and be with ourselves. That's the very spirit and the attitude that we are trying to cultivate with our clients. To be able to say, hey, we can just sit here and be with the anxiety. We can sit here and be with the sadness. Oftentimes our own and the stories of many of our clients have been characterized by running away from the fear, running away from the sadness, because if they were to feel sadness in their childhood, it would create a threat to the attachment ties to their caregivers, because oftentimes our caregivers don't know how to be with sadness. Our caregivers don't know how to be with anxiety. They might say things like, oh, just get over it, or just push through it, or it's not a big deal, right? Or they're starving people on some other side of the continent, right? So you should be grateful for what you have. You shouldn't listen to what your body's saying that you're full. You should eat because there's someone somewhere else that's hungry. And it's like, well, how does that make sense, right? And so mindfulness is the practice whereby we sit and we just observe what comes up. And so in the beginning of the mindfulness practices, what we'll do today is focused attention. So we take our attention, we focus it on one object of attention, right? We will focus on the body, we'll focus a little bit on the breath, we'll focus on sounds. And this helps us to kind of do a little bit of doing, right? Paying attention to the breath gives us a little bit of something to do. That's kind of like a baby step. But then gradually, as you practice mindfulness more often, you shift from a focused attention, say of the breath, with non-judgment and non-reaction, to what's called open monitoring. And this is a mindfulness that we're simply just sitting and being present to whatever comes up. One of the misconceptions is that mindfulness is about stopping thought, but it's not. It's impossible to stop thoughts. It's pretty impossible to control thoughts. What we're doing is we're changing our relationship to thoughts. So if during this practice thoughts come up of, oh, am I doing this right? Or, oh, this is boring. Or, oh, what was that noise? Or, oh, what do I have to do later? Or what are all the things that I have to do? Am I doing this right? We can blend with those thoughts, which is normally what we do. And we kind of take them at face value. I heard shortly ago, and I love this, all thoughts beg to be believed. But in mindfulness, rather than kind of automatically stepping into that thought and either pushing it away in resistance or grabbing onto it with craving and desire, we're simply stepping back, and just like a cloud goes by in the sky, we're saying, oh, that's just a thought. The thought comes up. This is boring. Oh, there's a thought that this is boring. And then I just simply come back to the object of focus. So I will guide you all through this. We'll do it for about 10 minutes. And there really is no goal, but if there was a goal, the goal here is simply to become aware, to allow whatever shows up to show up, and to do this with a non-judgmental, non-reactive attitude. Yes, John.
What was that quote you said of how we first have to recognize ourselves and think before we change?
It's a quote by Carl Rogers, and it's something along the lines of, the paradox is that I cannot change unless I accept myself completely as I currently am. Something along that. But if you look it up, I bet you could find it as well. So, any other questions before we get started? The attitude that I want to invite you all to here today as we're doing this is simply curiosity and openness. I'm going to welcome you guys to close your eyes as we're doing it. At a point, I'll welcome you all to close your eyes. You don't have to do that if you don't want. If that would feel remarkably uncomfortable. But I really would encourage you guys to kind of lean in and give it a try. So if there's no questions before we get started, I almost made a sign of the cross. But let's begin. So we can begin just looking forward, not looking at anything in particular, but just noticing all the colors in front of you. And we'll begin just with a few breaths in through the nose Out through the mouth. Again, in through the nose. Out through the mouth. And on this next breath in, as you breathe out, you can just gently close your eyes. We're just taking a few moments here to settle into now. We are practicing here in the next few moments, being here and being now. And so you can allow your breath to just return back to normal. Noticing that you're breathing all on your own. You can control your breath, but here we're just going to let the breath operate on its own, rising and falling. And you can notice on the out breath that each time you breathe out, your body just softens slightly. Your muscles just subtly let go of the slightest tension each breath out. The out breath is the body's natural way of letting go. And you can bring the attention now to the way your body's sitting. You've been sitting for a while now, probably about a half hour. But now you can really begin to notice what it actually feels like to be seated. And there's no need to change how you feel, but just notice if you feel comfortable in your seat or uncomfortable. Notice your feet, whether they're planted on the ground or crossed. Notice whether your feet feel tense or relaxed. Notice your bottom and your back resting on the chair. And notice all the different sensations of contact. At first, it might seem flat. But notice where you feel the most pressure underneath you and kind of zoom in gently there. And notice that rather than one static sensation, there's many different micro movements. From one moment to the next, there's a shifting of sensations. Notice the feeling of gravity. That gravity is actually pulling you down, holding you in your seat. We're simply observing and becoming very curious about our experience. Notice your hands, arms, maybe they're in your lap or on the desk. Just notice all the sensation that's present in your hands. Allowing your body to be exactly as it is. Allowing yourself to enjoy the support that gravity, your seat, your body is giving you. Noticing in your body, in a more global, general sense, any feelings of tightness or tension, perhaps any tension or heaviness in your belly, or in your chest, maybe in your shoulders or your neck or your back. There's no need to change or to try to relax. We're just observing without judging it, without trying to change it. Now allow the body to be a little bit more in the background. And notice all the different things that you can hear. There are no right things or wrong things to hear here. Notice how many different layers of sound there are. Whether it's the humming of the air conditioner, maybe the sound of someone coughing or sniffling, the creaking of the building. Notice that my voice too is one of these sounds. See if you can notice the farthest sound away from you. Noticing the closest sound to you. Maybe it's even a sound inside your ear. There's no need to think about these sounds or figure them out. We're listening in the same way that we taste food, or just experiencing it as it is, savoring it. And notice how sounds just emerge spontaneously all on their own. There's really nothing we can do to stop a sound. Notice how these sounds spontaneously emerge. You hear them, and then all on their own they drift away. Notice how this sound comes out of nowhere and automatically, just as easily, passes away. What happens to the sound after you've heard it? Just allowing yourself to be here with the sounds. And again, if you get caught up in thought, wondering, are you doing this right? Or is this boring or too abstract? Just notice that as a thought. That's all it is. It's a thought. And just like sounds, thoughts emerge out of nowhere. And if we allow them, by being non-judgmental and just observing, they also will pass, just like the sounds. And shifting the attention again, allowing these sounds to be a little bit more in the background. Bring your attention to your breath. There's no need to change the breath in any way. Just notice the breath exactly how it is. The attitude that we want to adopt here is an attitude of curiosity and wonder, like you're breathing for the very first time. You've never breathed before, and only now you're coming to encounter this miraculous experience of the breath, which sustains our life. Something that we take for granted, something so simple that happens all on its own. You can notice the breath in the belly, or notice your breath at at the tip of your nose or the tip of your mouth, perhaps in your throat. Bring the attention to the tip of your nose or the tip of your mouth where the breath is entering and leaving the body. And notice the change in temperature between the in-breath and the out-breath. The subtle coolness as we inhale. The subtle warmth as the breath leaves the body. And then notice the breath in the belly. The rising and the falling. Notice where in your body you feel the breath most intensely, most clearly. And just like a feather, rest your attention there. Following the sensation of the breath as it rises, reaches fullness, and then lets go. And if your mind wanders off into thought, that's perfectly okay. We kind of want to treat our mind here like a puppy that's just wandered off, and gently we want to pick it up without judgment, without scolding, and just bring it back to the breath. Rising and falling. And then for a few moments here, allow your mind to be completely free. Allow your mind to do whatever it wants to do. There's no need to control or to focus it on attention. Just give your mind the space to not have any agenda, to not have to do anything at all, to be however it would like. Just noticing what's here now when there's no problem to solve. Just observing what emerges when there's no thing you have to do. That's it. And then gently noticing the breath again. Gently noticing the body again, the feeling of weight, the feeling of tension, pressure, contact, the feeling of gravity. Noticing the sounds as well. And in your own time, as you're ready, just allowing your eyes to open. Just noticing how you feel. For any of us who might have fallen asleep, we can wake up here as well. It's quite a common experience when we meditate. One of the most common, I think, when we sit down to do nothing, we can realize how tired we are how exhausted we are, and it can be pretty easy to drift off into sleep. One of the things that we develop in meditation is a wisdom about effort. That if we try too hard, we curl up like a balled fist and just bring tension. If we don't try hard enough, we fall asleep. I'm just curious about your experiences here in doing this exercise. If anybody would like to share what the experience was like for you.
I feel like I didn't realize how uncomfortable I was until you brought the specific things to attention.
Yeah.
Like my hands, you brought the attention to my hands. I was I was so uncomfortable, but I wasn't even thinking about it before.
Yeah. It's wild how much our experience lights up, right, when we simply observe with curiosity. So we can look at mindfulness. It's really a cure for boredom, because you can do this at any moment, at any time. And sometimes when we begin mindfulness, we can have these really nice experiences. Sometimes it's much more difficult. It's okay, because we're not trying to cultivate relaxation. We're not trying to bring about some change. We're simply waking up. We're simply saying, hey, what's happening here, with curiosity?
Kind of felt like I went to a completely different place. I closed my eyes and I knew I was in this classroom, but then once I got into it, I was in a whole completely different place. And then when I opened my eyes back, I was like, oh, I'm back in this classroom.
Yeah.
Cool.
It was really nice at first, and I don't really know what happened, but I felt like my mind is being stretched. You know those cartoons when someone's dizzy and they're acting really fast?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I felt for 3 seconds. And then I felt like I was all the way there, and my body was down here, and then my mind was all the way here, my body was down here, and it was just really, really
Yeah.
contrast.
Yeah, and indeed, there's a guy, Locke Kelly, who I really enjoy, and he talks about ADHD as not an absence of attention, but as an overwhelm of attention. You know, that ADHD is not a lack of being able to attend to things. It's an overwhelm with how many things, and there's times when I meditate and nothing's going on, but I'm just like, oh, there's so much, right? There's so many sounds, there's so many experiences. It can be a really intense experience. And so part of meditation is just learning to sit with that over and over again. And we learn more artfully how to be present even in those experiences. Yeah.
I was following up with you for a couple of minutes, and then I think 5 or 6 minutes in, I just couldn't keep my eyes shut anymore, so I opened them, and then I just started dwelling to my own thoughts.
Yeah.
I kind of went into La La Land. I was listening to you, I was aware of what you were saying, but I was just in my thoughts.
Yeah. So it's so easy for us, right, to drift into autopilot. It's just so often the natural way of being, right? Where I'm going to Kroger and then suddenly I end up at church. And I'm like, what am I doing here, right? I know where I started. I started going to Kroger, and then somehow I ended up somewhere else. Or I walk into a room and I'm like, what am I doing here? What's going on? Our natural, it's not our natural way of being. What we develop, and we can see our lives as many of our clients' lives, is one reaction to another reaction to another reaction to another reaction to another reaction, and this is how our days are, right? I wake up, I knock over my coffee. Oh, it's going to be such a bad day. Oh, now I'm stressed because I'm late for class. Oh, now I'm late for class, and I'm stressing class, and now I'm thinking about all the other things that I have to do. Oh, and it's reaction to reaction to reaction to reaction to reaction. It's autopilot. And one of the keys to mindfulness is that we're not saying, oh, that's bad, we shouldn't be in autopilot, but rather as soon as we realize that we've drifted off in autopilot, we say, oh, I've drifted off. And then we just come back to the object of focus. In doing this over and over again, it's a way of training the mind. Yeah.
When I did this exercise, I feel pain behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I get aware by myself
Mm-hmm.
to know I am a person.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so interesting, right? Because on the one hand, you're saying, I'm becoming aware of this tension and this pain. Simultaneously, I'm coming into myself and realizing I am here. I'm developing this self-presence. And one of the foundational philosophies that mindfulness developed out of is the Buddhist tradition. And the Buddhists say that there's a difference between pain and suffering. That pain is the acute experience, right? If it's a pain in your neck, or it's a pain in your back, or it's a pain in your hands, or maybe it's an emotional difficulty, right? But the difference between pain and suffering is that suffering is pain plus emotional resistance. And so if we can eliminate, right, because what happens is my back's hurting, right? And then what I do functionally is, if this is the fact that my back is hurting, all day we are pretty much just going like, it shouldn't hurt, like it shouldn't be this bad, like what did I do, right? We try to push reality, the pain that's here, away. So the pain is here, but in resisting the pain and saying it shouldn't be this way, I have to get rid of it, I'm creating suffering. Because what's worse than pain in my neck is that I have pain in my neck and I'm insisting that it shouldn't be there and emotionally trying to get rid of it. So one of the remarkable gifts of mindfulness is that it teaches us to simply be with things as they are. And dialectical behavioral therapy, there's a dialectical, which means these kind of two things that appear to be opposites, but which paradoxically we have to hold at the same time. And this is key to therapy. The two things that seem to be polar opposites are change and acceptance, right? Wanting things to be different and allowing ourselves to come to terms with things that are. And in mindfulness, we're practicing the dance of holding those both at the same time. And this is encompassed so well in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the courage to change the things that I can. God, grant me the acceptance to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And oftentimes, especially in our culture, we are all about change, fixing, resolving, and we are completely depraved and deprived and lacking in the ability to accept things as they are. And there's a balance, there is, but the wisdom of mindfulness is also that, especially with negative emotions, right? When we pay attention to positive emotions, they grow. And we pay attention to negative emotions, they actually shrink. When we can attend to the pain on the moment by moment by moment basis, instead of projecting our fear of the pain into the future, all of a sudden it becomes far, far more manageable. Other thoughts and experiences? Yeah.
It's definitely difficult
Yeah.
for you to like focus on
Yeah.
I feel like someone thinks a lot about like the next thing.
Yes.
So I feel like it's hard to just like stay.
Yeah. And that's completely normal. That's par for the course. Again, mindfulness is not about controlling the mind into focus. Right? We think that in order to focus, I have to put more effort in. But focus is what naturally emerges when I take effort out. And it's that same thing of too much effort, and we're going to be a balled fist. Too little effort, and we'll be asleep. Mindfulness isn't about saying, okay, I need to focus more. It's simply about not judging ourselves when we realize we're off focus. It's like, oh, I'm trying to think about the next thing again. Okay. And then I come back to the breath. And we do that over and over and over and over again, right? The difference between maybe somebody who's been meditating for years and somebody who's just beginning to meditate in terms of the distractions that they experience is that the person who's been meditating for a long time experiences 100 distractions in 5 minutes. But each time they just come back to the breath. The person that's been meditating for a short time, a few months or a year, experiences 1 or 2 distractions in 5 minutes. But they take 3 minutes each to realize that we're off track. So being off track isn't the problem, because we can always begin again. always begin again. As soon as we realize, oh, I'm distracted, our normal pattern is, I suck at this. I'm getting too distracted. This is so boring. It's so irritating. It's so difficult, right? But that's all judgment and reaction. We simply say, oh, I'm distracted, and we come back. And then we say, oh, I'm distracted. Oh, I suck at this. We say, oh, I'm judging myself. Oh, okay. We don't even judge ourselves for judging ourselves in this practice. And so it's a remarkably necessary practice for us as therapists to help, right, step back from these patterns that we so often get caught in or that people might elicit from us. Any other questions before we shift into chapter 8? Cool. So we are picking up with relational themes and reparative experiences. So we have these three ways in which clients tend to recapitulate problematic interactions. Eliciting maneuvers, testing behaviors, and transference. Eliciting maneuvers are security operations, right? Well, to talk about these broadly, all of these are ways that our clients have learned to establish stability in the world, a sense of stability in the world. But the issue is that the stability that they're experiencing also has huge costs. And the costs are anxiety, depression, overwhelm, sadness, inability to cope with things. These are rigid ways of behaving in the world. As we come to know our clients, we're developing our working hypothesis, and this working hypothesis is a string that can help us to see what are the relational themes that exist and have developed through this person's experiences in life. And if I can know what the relational themes are, I can know what reparative experiences this person needs. That quote, I'll say it over and over again, of client response specificity. The question is, what relational experience does this individual need to change? Eliciting maneuvers are ways of being where the client tries to do two things. They either try to avoid a conflict with the individual. They try to ward off feelings of anxiety by just kind of by engaging in some other behavior. Or the second thing is they try to avoid the anxiety by skipping it. So we can the two ways are either the client tries to work around it and avoid it, or the client tries to get the person to act in a way which would resolve it. So an example here would be for a client that is afraid of being criticized. One way that the client might try to escape the criticism, they're trying to elicit praise, is to put 100 hours in on a work project that probably should have taken 30, right? And so they are trying to act in a way that will bring about praise from another person. Another way that this client might protect themselves in order to avoid a situation like that, or in order to avoid criticism, would be say, the situation of a promotion, right? Where the client, rather than asking for the promotion, which they probably deserve, would say, you know what, I'm just going to kind of avoid that situation. I don't think I need it. I don't think I deserve it. So I'm just going to kind of sidestep the situation altogether. But eliciting maneuvers are ways that our clients will interact with us that protect them from an unwanted response. So a client might come into session and say, look at all these great things that I've done this week. Client might come in and say, I got an A on my test. I got this new job interview, right? I got this very prestigious internship. All these things. And here, we know we should have some working hypothesis with the client. So if we have a working hypothesis that kind of leads us to believe that this client has learned that they have to perform exceptionally to maintain their sense of self-esteem, we are going to respond differently than if this client is somebody who has struggled all their life to get anything done. Right? So if this client is somebody who compulsively, perfectionistically obsesses over their work, if we jump in with this client and say, oh, great job, that's awesome, you're doing so well, and we just get right on that train, we are actually just continuing this relational theme of, in order to win the approval of John Paul, I have to be completely exceptional in life. But if we can see, man, dude, you've got these deep bags under your eyes. You look exhausted. I can see just in sitting with you that you are like depleted, even as you're saying, I did this, and I did this, and I did this, right? We can praise that like, wow, that is a lot that you've gotten done. What's it been like to do all that? Oh, I've been exhausted. Oh, I'm completely depleted. I don't have anything left in the tank. I'm empty. And then we can connect with them to say, hey, we can connect on we're not trying to, we never want to punish success. But we can say, hey, this is a place where you can connect, we can connect on your success, but we can also connect and explore what are the costs that it took for you to get there. And so these are these fixed interpersonal styles that avoid anxiety by acting in such a way to bring about a different response from somebody else. Another example would be in a moving towards client. A moving towards client, right, someone of a dismissive attachment style, what kind of interpersonal experience do they expect and also not want?
They don't want the interpersonal, the inner working model. The interpersonal experience, is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
They don't want it to be one of someone moving away. They don't want to displease anybody.
Think of dismissive. That would be preoccupied. What type of relational experience is somebody who is dismissive? That might...
I thought you said moving towards.
No, dismissive. I might have said moving towards. I think I meant moving against. I'm sorry. Somebody who's moving against, somebody who's of a dismissive attachment style. What are the type of relational experiences that are unwanted for them?
Inferiority.
Mm-hmm. Paint that picture a little bit more.
So they don't want to be seen as the weaker person in a relationship, so they're going to do everything they can to get to the top.
Yeah, right. They want to do everything to be in the top, right? So they're going to avoid being on the bottom end of hierarchy, right? So that individual is the individual who might come into your office and say, I want to sit there. I want to sit in your chair. Or they might sit in your office and say, well, how's this therapy work? I think it's all mumbo jumbo. What, are you going to analyze my dreams, right? We talked about one of the clients earlier on. And what this client is trying to avoid is being controlled. And by doing that, they're trying to interpersonally avoid being controlled by taking control. But in them taking control, they are actually likely to be a self-fulfilling prophecy and bring counter control. No, you can't sit there. That's your chair. And all of a sudden get locked into these power dynamics. When we provide the behaviors that these eliciting behaviors are trying to bring about, treatment stays stuck, right? Grace, you talked a little bit about from the chapter the people pleasing. Josh, I think you mentioned this as well, of if I'm a people pleaser as a therapist, which many of us likely are, and my client's a people pleaser, it's really easy for that client to kind of figure out what does this therapist want me to do and do it. And I'm like, wow, this client's doing everything right. Good job. And then we just kind of keep playing back and forth, like Peter in the chapter, this praise. But as long as we do that, we're not helping them to actually develop boundaries because they are actually experiencing enmeshment. And so one of the really interesting things about defenses is that our defenses actually pull certain responses from other individuals. If I'm somebody, which I am, who doesn't like to be controlled, I'm likely to step into a situation and try to be controlling. And that's actually likely to elicit somebody else in the situation who's controlling to try to control me, which would be very different than if I stepped into the situation and I was able to be aware and say, well, I realize I don't have to control this situation. I don't have to change it. I wouldn't draw out those same dynamics from this other person. So our clients have learned these nuanced ways, it's not conscious, that actually bring about those same patterns towards themselves. When our clients do this, oftentimes it elicits our own countertransference. So it elicits our own problematic reactions to the client. So when I'm working with individuals with control dynamics, those are clients that can be tricky for me to really check, like, okay, am I responding in an egalitarian and a helpful way? Or am I acting out of counter control? Am I trying to tell this person, no, you really need to do this. No, you really need to do this mindfulness meditation. No, you really need to listen to the feedback I'm giving you. This is one of the reasons that the mindfulness, this practice, is so important, because just like you were saying, Becca, we might not be aware of how uncomfortable we are. We might not be aware of how intimidated we are by a client. And if we're not aware of that, we're likely to respond with countertransference. And so when our clients act out in this way, we'll go here. When they draw out in these ways that bring countertransference, what we want to do is depersonalize it, right? And this is, does anybody remember the stance that Tiber describes this as in the beginning of the text? What type of stance do we want to have with our clients when we're sitting in the session?
We want to kind of look at objectively what they're saying and not exactly detach ourselves from what they're saying and experiences, but kind of look at it objectively, but also be open to what they're saying and kind of explore that option.
Yeah.
Not kind of identify with them and take on their emotions.
Yes. Exactly, right? We want to have a participant/observer stance where we're both engaged with them, but we also have this ability to be outside. And what helps this is our working hypothesis. So we want to depersonalize and understand process. So when we experience these clients eliciting maneuvers, rather than automatically get it pulled in, one of the things that can help us most is to say, what's the working hypothesis here? How would most people respond when this person steps in the room and they say, wow, your drapes are really dingy? How would most people respond when they step in the room and they say, wow, this room is so beautiful. I just love it. You did such a great job. I love your decor. You're so good, right? How would people respond when you say hello to someone and they don't respond as well? So this is all going into when we experience those eliciting maneuvers, we want to connect with the process that's going on between us and ask ourselves what our working hypothesis with this individual is. The second thing that we're trying to do is learning to engage the client in a different way. So rather than acting automatically with punitiveness, or rather than acting automatically with accepting praise, we want to just respond in a little bit of a different way. Right? So if a client comes in and says, wow, this room is so awesome, it would be pretty easy to be like, oh, you think so? What's your favorite part? Yeah, I put a lot of work into it. Yeah, I really like the decor too, right? In that sense, we're actually stepping in and we're saying to the client, I like it when you give me that feedback. I want you to give me more of it, right? Another thing we can say is, oh, I'm glad you enjoy it. That's really nice, right? And we're not dismissing it. We're not minimizing it. We're responding to what they're saying, but specifically, we might not respond with that same kind of enthusiasm. So we're trying to engage them, or a counter-controlling client, right? If a counter-controlling client says, oh, I want to sit in your chair. To me, a lot of times, I'll just say, oh, okay, you can sit there. I don't feel the need to get into a power battle with someone who wants to sit in my chair. It's like, I don't give a shit, it's a chair. Like, I think as soon as I'm like, well, no, that's my place to sit. Now, I want to kind of still, if I'm responding in a different way, saying, sure, you can sit there, I'm still wondering, like, oh, how would most people respond that way? How would a doctor in a doctor's office respond, right? How would a teacher respond? How would a clergy respond? How would different people respond? So we're still informing that in our working model. The other way, now this is engaging in a different way without making it overt. So this is usually the kind of way we want to respond in the beginning. But the third way, of course, is making a process comment. And usually you'll want to wait to make that kind of a process comment until a little bit farther on in the treatment. You might say something like, it seems like it's really important for you to be in control of this relationship, right? Or it seems like it's really important for you to let me know how much you like my office. Or it seems really important for you to let me know how much you like X, Y, or whatever it may be. So we make a process comment, bringing the eliciting maneuvers to the table for exploration. And then the fourth way is simply to explore others' reactions. And this one I don't actually, this one again, this is probably something that you want to kind of save for later in treatment, right? So maybe it's 5, 6, 7 sessions in and somebody does something that's pretty annoying or frustrating. Or actually a really good situation to illustrate this is if somebody comes in and just dumps a lot of emotion on you. And you're sitting there like, I don't really know how to respond here, right? You can simply ask them, right? We talk about, empathize, 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 and that's very, very, very important. But we don't have to be a one-trick pony. We can just ask, how do people usually respond to you? When you're feeling this upset, when you're feeling this overwhelmed, you've just shared so much with me. How do other people usually respond to you when you share in this way? And at first, as a therapist, this is really hard to do, but it comes naturally. It comes with experience. And you'll have moments, and I still have many, many moments when I'm with a client and I'm like, okay, something's going on here, like something's happening, something's drawing, and I don't want to get pulled in, but I also don't want to be dismissive myself and just kind of move away. And after the session, that's where supervision comes in. And I can realize like, oh, this person that was like begging for support, maybe I had my own countertransference reaction that was saying, oh, I don't want to tell them what to do because that's going to create dependence. Oh, but I also don't want to leave them because I don't want to just like leave them hanging saying, hey, I need help and I need support. That's where we go to supervision, right? And I say like, hey, this thing came up with this client. and I could tell that this was an eliciting maneuver, and I didn't really know how to respond helpfully. I recognize that some of my stuff was coming up, and I need to explore that, and we can explore that in supervision. But I'm also wondering, like, what would be a more effective way to respond in that situation? And so as we are looking at countertransference, there's two ways, two types of countertransference. The first is client-induced. And the second is therapist-induced. And so countertransference refers to our feelings towards the client. These can be both positive and negative feelings. So it's not just bad feelings. But as we said, clients often elicit these same feelings and reactions from other people. And also, when clients elicit these same reactions, when they act in these ways, it's easy for us as therapists to overreact with our own problems, right? And so we need to be able to tell, when is the countertransference, when are my feelings of frustration towards the client client-induced? And the way we would identify this is, how do other people in the client's life typically respond to them? That's the kind of distinguishing factor. Would most people who experienced this reaction from the client have these feelings of frustration, right? If somebody came into my office and did something and I felt frustrated towards them, is that something that pretty much anybody who's a human would feel frustrated towards them about? If the answer is yes, that tells me that this is client-induced transference, meaning I'm probably feeling this way because the client's acting in a problematic interpersonal way, and many other people in their life often experience them in the same manner. On the other hand, therapist-induced countertransference occurs if I ask, if this person walked into my office and acted this way, would the majority of people in this classroom have that same feeling of reaction towards them? If the answer is no, I got to go, oh, there's some more work for me to do, right? I got to go do this in my own therapeutic work. So when it's therapist-induced, we want to kind of hold that and then take that to supervision, take that to our own therapy. And then finally, oftentimes when we're engaged in reenactments, right? When we are recapitulating problematic patterns, what's happening is that both of these are present at the same time, right? That the client would draw this from pretty much anybody. And also what the client would draw from pretty much anybody is also tapping into my own unfinished business. So we will pick up with testing behaviors and finish out the chapter on Thursday.